When you hear her cries, run and pray that she doesn't hear or see you. La Llorona is a tormented spirit that is in no mood for company. She cries in anguish at the loss of her child, and she'll make anyone pay for getting in her way. Enjoy these allegedly true stories of encounters with La Llorona. If you want your story in a future video, you can send it over at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for stories from backpackers and night clerks. My Grandpa Heard La Llorona by Julio O. A year ago, my grandpa passed away, but before he passed, I asked him if the story he told me when I was little was true. He said it was. That is the story of how he heard the cries of La Llorona. It was the early 90s in a small town outside Mexico City. My mom's side of the family was quite poor, and because of this, my grandparents and their 12 children, including my mom, could only live in a house of 3 rooms, with one of those rooms being the kitchen. This resulted in the other 2 rooms being cramped at night, and this gets worse when it gets hot outside in the summer, and unfortunately, that's when this story takes place. One especially miserable summer night, my grandfather could not sleep because of the heat, so he decided to take a walk outside to try to cool him down. Once outside, he began to walk to the center of the town they lived at. Usually, there would be people at the town's cantina, but that night was different. When my grandpa passed by the place, he saw that the owner was closing the bar early, and the man had a worried look on his face. My grandpa simply thought that the bar did not get enough customers to stay open for the night, so he continued to walk without any worries. Looking back at it, he realized that that could have been a warning about what was yet to come. He continued to walk until he began to reach the edge of town. That's when he thought it was about time to head back. Right after turning back to walk home, he began hearing a faint cry from the edge of town. He quickly assumed that he had just imagined it and continued on his way. This quickly changed when he heard the cry once again, but a bit louder. He was walking faster now, thinking that maybe some teenagers were trying to scare him because he was alone at night. He continued to quicken his pace when, after about 5 minutes of hearing the growing crying, there was suddenly an ear-shattering screech coming from just 10 feet behind him. By then, he was booking it. He said that even though he was reaching his mid-50s, he felt like he ran faster than he ever had in his younger days. After running for a few more minutes, he stopped, trying to catch his breath, and the screaming went back to faint crying. Throughout all of this, my grandpa never turned around to see who was making the cries. He said that it never occurred to him to try to turn around, but I have a feeling he would have regretted that. It wasn't over, though. My grandpa knew in the back of his mind that the crying would eventually reach him again, so he began to knock at people's doors that had their lights on inside. After knocking for a couple of minutes unsuccessfully, none of them would open up, and he saw that some of the people in their homes would turn off their lights right after he knocked. He doesn't blame them, though. They probably thought that he was a drunk, trying to figure out which home was his. He quickly gave up, knowing that the only way out of this was walking back home. The crying had faded, and the sudden silence was soon interrupted by the sound of footsteps coming after him. Even so, my grandfather would not turn around. When he was almost at his house, the loud screaming came again, but now only a few feet behind him. He ran for it, but no matter how fast he ran, the screaming continued at the same volume, as if whatever was following him was keeping the same pace. My grandpa finally saw the turn to directly reach his home. He made a sharp turn and entered his front yard. The second he was there, the screaming stopped. When he got inside, my grandma was in the kitchen, asking him where he had gone. He told her his story. When he finished, they were both quiet. Even though the screaming stopped when he was in the yard, my grandma said that she hadn't heard any screaming from where she was. The two of them became quiet again. After a moment of thinking, she then asked my grandpa if he knew who was making the sound. He said no, because he did not turn around to see. My grandma told him that he made the right choice to not turn around, because that screaming, she said, was most likely La Llorona. Before this experience, neither one of them actually believed the stories and only used to use them to scare kids. But after this, my grandparents did not allow anyone to leave the home after night, except if they were in a group. Even in his last months of living, he continued to claim that this story was real, and I told him that I believed him. Now, even after he's gone, I believe this story with all my heart. The Cries by Sierra. When I was a child, my grandparents told me stories of La Llorona. Now, my grandparents' house, which is on a ranch in a remote mountainside in New Mexico, is surrounded by forest and plenty of creatures. I've seen black bears, deer, foxes, and I used to stay up at night howling with the coyotes on the back porch of their home. My grandparents told me the story of La Llorona one day while we were driving to New Mexico from Colorado. They told me of how she drowned her children and took her life after she realized what she had done. They told me that you can hear her cries at night sometimes, and if you do, never approach the sound. Well, there came a night when I was in bed and about to go to sleep. It was maybe about 8 or 9 o'clock, and my grandparents had us go to bed early so we could get up early for ranch work. I was trying my best to fall asleep because I hate waking up tired. Then I heard it, a distant wailing sound. I know what a coyote sounds like, and this was not a coyote. I could hear what sounded like words in the distance, words in the middle of her cries. Mi hijos. The crying was distant. Then, as a few minutes passed, it got much louder and clearer. Mi hijos. I honestly didn't know whether it was something I was hearing outside the house or a sound coming from my own mind. It was almost deafening. I was terrified, and I spent the rest of the night shaking, listening to her cries between the loud and aggressive barking of my grandparents' guard dogs. I was much too afraid to leave my bed that night, and even more afraid to remove my pillow that I then had clutched tightly around my ears. The following morning, I asked to see if anyone else heard the crying sounds, and no one else had any clue what I was talking about. I can't help but wonder if what I heard was real, or simply the manifestation of my own fears. La Llorona by Marnin 327. This is a story from my grandmother, but it has been passed down to tell others that if you decide to venture to Mexico, you may just experience a very terrifying paranormal phenomenon. My grandmother lived in a small village in Mexico, just a handful of streetlights and friendly neighbors. Everyone knew everybody. My grandmother herself had 6 siblings, 5 brothers, and a sister, which is my aunt. She said that her brothers went out to hang around with the other neighbor boys one day, running around, playing games, and just causing trouble. There's just not a whole lot else to do in a small, poor village. My grandmother, her sister, and her mother stayed home, doing some chores and preparing dinner. At one point, the mother decided to scold their brothers, like any mother would do when the sun went down and her children got back late. Just because everyone knew everybody didn't mean it was safe, especially after dark. After that, my grandmother saw her mother grab her knitting tools, then sit on the porch in her rocking chair, mumbling what she was going to do to those troublemaking boys. But of course, she used other colorful words in Spanish. My grandmother and her sister sat next to her and played simple games, and then helped their mother knit. In front of my grandmother's house was all dirt road and one lone street light. It was the only source of light for a long while. After a while, my grandmother started to hear something. It sounded like screaming and running. Sure enough, it was the neighbor boys and her brothers. But because of the lack of light in their direction, she couldn't see much at the time. Beside her, her mother started cursing more about how late they were and how rude they were being running like lunatics that late at night. Then, at that point, the boys were soon visible as they began to pass the streetlight, slamming themselves into the small wooden doorway of their mother's house, toppling and tripping over each other. But my grandmother noticed immediately that something was wrong. It wasn't just boys playing. They were acting like that because they were scared. Her mother got up, hands on her hips, ready to school them. But she stopped in her tracks when she noticed, too, the streams of tears down the boys' pale faces. "Now what happened?" she said. "What's got you all spooked?" This was in Spanish, of course. The boy sputtered and stuttered and sobbed, but finally my grandmother's older brother spoke up. The crying woman is following us. She's telling us to follow her." He sobbed and clung to her apron. "She's still behind us. La Llorona is still out there." My grandmother wasn't sure if she believed them. She thought they were just saying that to get out of any punishment, until her brother pointed out the doorway. She didn't see anything, but apparently her mother did, and she did the complete opposite of what you would expect. She began laughing. She turned to the boys who were still scared. "See, this is what happens when you're searching for trouble, and don't come home before dark. I might even let her take you this time for not listening to me. Now go eat, all of you." She waved her hands in a shoo kind of motion. "I'll deal with this," she continues to chuckle. The scared boys quickly got up and obediently did as they were told. Then their mother marched back out to the porch, sitting in her rocking chair, and started knitting again. But now she was staring out into the darkness. That's when my grandmother herself finally saw and even heard it. There was a shadow passing back and forth under the only light in the village, followed by a loud and desperate wail that filled the night. My grandmother was frightened and began to shake. Her mother then started to chuckle and continued to rock. "Go on, keep on crying, but you ain't getting none of my kids." There was another sob and wail, but their mother continued. "Keep going, you're not welcome here. Go find someone who will actually listen," and she began to wave her away. The shadow continued to sway, and for a brief moment, my grandmother saw a very long-haired person. The sobbing stopped, but the figure swayed for another 10 minutes or so. My grandmother claimed that it was like a standoff. She said that you could feel a sort of electrical tension going on between them. But as quickly as La Llorona had appeared, she swayed once more and disappeared. Her mother laughed and said, "That's what I thought." Sounding satisfied, she gathered her things and made the notion of the cross before she entered the house. She turned to my grandmother and her sister, saying, "This is why you listen to your parents, okay?" The two of them nodded and clung on to their mother as she prepared everyone for bed. Later, as her father came home from a neighbor's, her mother sent the children home with him. My grandmother always said her mother was something else, a brave woman who believed in the folklore around her and said to never provoke it. Her stories are entertaining and have morals, but the proof are the scars my uncles have. As a warning, be careful at night, and be wary of the Cries if you're ever staying in Mexico. My Paranormal Costa Rica Story by Manny. About 15 years ago, my family and I went to visit my mom's side of the family in Philadelphia, Costa Rica. My younger brother and I used to stay at one of my aunt's houses where 3 of my cousins live. One night, we were coming back from a beach, and my cousin's brother and I were in the back seat, passed out from all the activities we had done. We were traveling down the road before getting to my aunt's house. For some reason, I had an urge to wake up because I felt something was off before we reached the small lot. Right before we pulled in, I saw a woman with long black hair covering her face. She was wearing a long white flowing dress. She was just standing there. And as we passed by her, I swear I heard her say, "Hey." She sounded like she was in pain or extremely sad. I quickly asked my aunt, who was sitting in the front passenger seat just in front of me, "Who is that lady?" She turned, and for only a moment she seemed confused by my question, until she looked out the window where I saw her. Immediately, she pushed my head down and said, "Don't look at her. Don't listen to her." At that point, it was already too late, because I'd already seen that the woman outside was not standing on the ground, but was instead hovering inches above it. I think what we saw that night was La Llorona. The Crying by Sofia Sugarcane. This story is not my own. It is my best friend's. Let's call her Anay. It took place in summer 2017. We live in Las Vegas, and it was monsoon season, so it was pouring down hard for a few days in a row. It was a hard Friday night, and the rain had stopped outside Anay's house. At the time, she literally lived right across the street from a park and field, in a pretty large neighborhood. Anay was home alone. Her room was at the very front of the house, and it's a 1-story place. As it was raining, she had her window open. She was on her phone listening to music. As I said before, the rain eventually stopped at her place. With the loud pitter-patter of rain gone, she suddenly began to hear a different sound. Faint crying coming from the distance. At first, she didn't think anything of it, and tried to ignore it. Maybe someone had been drinking and was crying about whatever, and they were just being too loud. But the crying becomes more and more clear, which means that it was getting closer. With it coming ever closer, and they said that it sounded like a woman. It was extremely unusual. I mean, she lived next to the park, and weird things happened from time to time, just as anywhere. But nothing this odd, nothing this loud. The cries soon turned into what sounded more like screams of pain, like the anguish of someone heartbroken. She has the idea to record it on Snapchat to ask if anyone can hear the cries, and just as she pulls her phone out, everything suddenly goes quiet. Confused, she sat there in front of her window, listening and waiting to see if it came again. She sat there for a good while until she called me and told me everything, telling me how she was scared and that, more than ever, she did not want to be alone. To be honest, when I heard her story, I was excited, because I love everything strange and unusual, and I was all ears listening to her explain what happened, telling her that I think it was La Llorona. We both have Mexican heritage, and we grew up knowing the stories of her legends, how she lost her child, and that she would cry through the streets and roads looking for it. When I told her what I believed it was, she only freaked out more. Besides seeing a motionless figure in a tattered dress with long dark hair in the distance, nothing else happened to Anae, and she couldn't be happier that she hasn't seen or heard it again. To this day, the two of us believe it was La Llorona, and I'm sure on the next rainy night, you'll hear those cries of pain as she looks for her lost child. Crying for Her Children by Victoria, 1918. This happened in May 2018, when I took an unfortunate trip to Mexico for my cousin's funeral. I'll try to remember exact details, as I was not in my best emotional state at the time, due to her passing. My parents and I traveled in a car together, still in shock, and not really wanting to talk about the entire situation. We got there, and to say the very least, it was sad. I couldn't bear to see my aunt so destroyed. After the funeral was over, some of my aunt's uncles and cousins decided to take the drive to my parents' house, located in a small town named El Fraile, located about an hour from Monterrey, Mexico. Picture it like this: a church, 2 small grocery stores, which are owned by the residents of the area, and 2 small schools. The houses there are few in number and far between one another, but they're all aligned on dirt roads near a huge river. We got to the house, and my mom started making some tea to maybe calm our nerves a bit. I stepped out onto the porch as the house was a bit overcrowded. By then, it had begun raining outside, so the air was thick and humid. My cousin, Claudia, came out and sat next to me. We talked about memories we had with our now passed cousin, Sylvia. We talked about how we used to go down to the river every summer vacation, whenever I would visit, to play and eat fruit. You know, Claudia said with a smile, they say that Llorona comes out after it rains. That's when the river overflows, she says. I laughed and called BS, but I told her we should walk down to the river anyway, later that night, to see what all the hype is about. I was basically calling her bluff. I really wish I hadn't said anything like it though, because now I won't even go near a body of water at night. Around 1 a.m. that night, we began our quiet journey heading down to the huge slope that led to the river. As we walked, we could hear cattle, crickets, and even the occasional frog. As we drew closer to the river, we began to hear a new, disturbing sound. At first, it was like a low cry, It wasn't very loud in the beginning. My eyebrow raised, then I turned to ask Claudia, "Do you hear that?" "Maybe it's just an owl," she said. I rolled my eyes. We kept walking carefully, and I could swear that the wailing sound was getting louder. It was so loud at one point, I thought my cousin was pranking me, until she finally heard it herself. "Oh crap, do you hear that?" she said to me. I knew it was no prank. When I looked at her, her skin was pale, and even her cheeks had goosebumps. She looked like she was going to cry at any second. The wailing grew louder until we heard a woman's voice behind it. She was saying something. "Mi hijos, mi hijos." We were horrified. What this woman was saying translated to, "My children." We didn't know where she was, but she continued to chant that phrase for about 20 seconds. To us, it felt like it lasted forever. We were petrified, frozen in fear. Finally, the crying seemed to be getting further away from us, until soon it dissipated, and there was only the sound of the river overflowing and roaring past. The two of us booked it back to the house and locked ourselves in my room. We cried for a moment, as we were afraid the sound would return and follow us back to the house. I'm positive that what we heard that night was the famous La Llorona, and I'm just glad to be back in the US, far away from any river. The legend of La Llorona is definitely a scary one. Her origins aren't entirely known, though. Some say she drowned her children and is cursed to wander the earth looking for them. Others say she lost a child in an accident, and her troubled soul keeps her bound to the earth. But if there's anything we're completely certain about, it's that you do not want to run into her, especially at night. Always walk with a friend after dark, and try to stay inside if it's night, and whatever you do, stay clear of any rivers after the rain. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can send me your true stories at darknessprevails.org. I'm looking for stories from backpackers and stories from night clerics. Thank you. If you want to support my channel by going beyond just viewing and liking my videos, go to patreon.com/darknessprevails and donate any amount. You'll get your name in the credits at the end of my videos, and you'll unlock ad-free MP3 downloads of my episodes from here on out. Or if you're lacking clothes or you want something cool, go to teespring.com/darkprevails or click the shop button below to browse my merchandise. Now then, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous full video about the 5 most horrifying phone calls. Alyssa Theoni says, "Oh my god, this is going to be great. Never stop making videos." Well, when I get this kind of support and excitement from my fans, I definitely never want to stop. Thank you, Alyssa. Siva Kumar SL9 says, "You almost sound like Roger L. Jackson, who's the voice of Ghostface in Wes Craven's Scream movies. I never even thought about that, but I'm honored to be compared to such a creepy and chilling legendary voice. Ah, great. Now I need to watch a Scream marathon." Goff Daily says, "My scary calls are all just bill collectors. You know, bill collectors are just what they call the demons from the 13th circle of hell. Just never be late, or they'll curse you with late fees, which absolutely make no freaking sense. Oh, you're late because you can't afford it, so here's more money to pay because you can't afford it. So dumb." Dr. Matz, "The F is the crier." Well, Dr. Matz, looks like you go and learn today. And AJAKUK1 says, the best 999 or UK emergency number call was a guy who didn't get the right burger and wanted the police to go get it taken back. I swear to God, people call emergency lines for the dumbest reasons. I think we need a whole period at school dedicated to what the word emergency means. Anyways guys, thanks so much for tuning in to another Darkness Prevails episode. More scary stories are coming soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my wonderful patrons who continue to donate. Remember to be safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.